Hi everyone, thanks for joining this webinar on how behavioural science and conversion rate optimization will help retailers thrive in 2021. It's great to see so many of you here today, and we have such exciting sign-ups as well from some giants in their respective industries, like EDF, Royal Mail, Tesco. So welcome everyone. My name is David Cooper. I'm the marketing manager at Fountain, and I'll be your host today. But it's not me you're here for. Today, our esteemed speakers are going to be addressing how the world has shifted dramatically to online retail and the opportunities now in e-commerce. And with competition for online sales increasing fiercely, they'll be showing you how by improving the customer journey, e-commerce marketers are able to make the most of this shift. This will be including establishing audiences, targeting, optimizing the user journey, and applying audience optimization. So our two speakers are Steve Brunt, Planning Director and Marketing at the Behaviours Agency. The Behaviours Agency is a creative agency that uses behavioural science to make marketing more effective. Steve himself has 20 years of experience in marketing strategy and branding and has a focus on influencing behaviour throughout his career. He has led strategy for accounts such as Co-op, BP, Unilever, EA Games, and many more. And then our other speaker is Laura North, Conversion Rate Optimization Specialist at Fountain. Fountain are a global award-winning digital marketing agency employing data and evidence for facts-based marketing strategies focused on profit. Laura has over 5 years experience in UX and conversion rate optimization with focus on behavior analysis. She has been a UX researcher working on renowned brands such as NUA, Virgin Wines, Bark & Trees, and in-house at Aviva. If you do have any questions for Steve and Laura, please do leave them in the chat box to the right of the video stream, and we will try and answer as many of them as possible at the end. I will stop talking now, and I will hand over to our dynamic duo. So over to you guys.
Thanks, David. Right, I'm with the dubious task of pressing forward. So unfortunately, since we're not in the same room, Laura can't kick me under the table. So forgive us if we take a moment to move between slides as we do this as smoothly as we can. Thanks very much for joining us. We're going to talk today about a very top level, really. I mean, obviously we've got quite a short amount of time, and there's a hell of a lot, and both Laura and I can talk for England. So we're going to rattle through a whole load of stuff. There'll be an opportunity at the end for questions, as David said, but also if anyone wants to get in touch afterwards, we're available. So that will also be possible. But hopefully we're going to cover off some areas that are of interest. Our first kind of point is what's keeping people awake at night. There we go. What's keeping you awake at night? Most retailers are worried about at least thinking about the enormous shift we've seen in consumer behaviour over the course of the last year, especially. But even going back much further, there's a sea change now in terms of who's willing to shop online. Clearly, the boomers in particular have caught up at last. But more than that, there's a shift to the necessity, but also to the desire to do so. And of course, we've also got a massive shift in disposable income as people that aren't going on holiday for even longer than we all thought now. There's a lot of money to be spent, a lot of addiction to getting parcels coming to the door, and overall, like just a real shift in people's behaviour. And there's a huge risk in that for big brands, especially brands that are well established offline, which is that you start to see this loss of your scale advantage. You're used to having a footprint in the real world and a real sense of scale, but you're actually one click away from a retailer that's 200th of the size of you, but looks pretty much the same on tabs. And of course, we've also got e-retailers who are very much more used to competing in that world, more agile, more adaptable, quicker to change, and built to adapt to changing landscapes. So huge shift taking place there. And Laura, do you want to just say something about the traffic side?
Yeah, so I've just added in a couple of stats there about how e-commerce has changed over the past year due to mainly COVID, but also people's growing acceptance of online retail. So we've seen that 58% globally are now shopping online over in store. That has changed for specific products. Like in the last year, things like garden furniture has just gone completely through the roof, and obviously certain products have then reduced, but overall people are now moving online to get what they need. And then in terms of switching brands, as Steve alluded to, it's easy to set up an online store now. People can move very quickly. Don't have the legacy kind of hard to package up things for people. So, you've got these new competitors without any baggage coming in, which means that if your branding is good and people care about it, they are likely to move away from it.
Yeah, we've always had the thumbnail effect of a brand.
I missed what you said there, Steve.
Sorry, I said we always had that thumbnail effect of people's brands being minimised to look roughly the same pack shot form next to another one, but now the tab is the same equivalent. One retailer looks as good as the next, and the same scale issues occur. No perspective online. There's no way of seeing the size of something and making a judgment on it.
Exactly. And then we've got a comment in there around emerging tech. So a lot more retailers are turning to innovative ways of showing their products. So I guess trying paint colours on your wall in augmented reality, and that's led to an uptick in conversion online. But also people are researching what they're buying more often because it's easier to open a new tab and kind of go, oh, this has got the thing that I want, rather than walking into every store and trying to keep a mental tally of the features of what you want to buy. So we're seeing that growing as well.
Great. So that's what we think is probably driving a lot of the interest today. What we wanted to say was I'm going to talk mostly about behavioural science. Laura's going to talk mostly about conversion rate optimization. So we thought we'd better start by actually defining what we mean. When we talk about behavioural science, a lot of people are interested in behavioural science. A lot of people have read a few books, Nudge perhaps, or Thinking Fast and Slow. There's 50, 60 years of behavioural science out there. And a lot of great thinking has been done about understanding how behaviour is driven, what drives it in the real world. And we think most of that boils down to thinking about how emotions, environment, and social factors have a big influence on the decisions we take. That brings in elements of that kind of popular science stuff we referred to, but also things like cognitive science, semiotics. So we draw heavily on the evidence base that's out there after 50 years that tells us what actually really does have an influence on behaviour. Because fundamentally for us, when we're doing marketing, at least, we see marketing as being about driving behaviour. All marketing should be about moving people from the default behaviour, the thing they do if we didn't do anything, to the desired behaviour, the thing they do if we're successful. And if you think in those terms, marketing isn't about getting a bit of information across, it's about getting an action, getting a decision, driving an understanding of your brand or your business. And it's worth remembering that our brains don't work by processing data or information. They work by comparing what stimulus they're having thrown at them to what they already know or what else is next to that piece of stimulus. So it's always a compare and contrast process. And critically, all behaviours are underpinned by three things: the motivation, the reason why you want to do it, the means, the resources you need to do it, and the trigger, the reason to do it right now. So really for us, marketing is all about deciding which of those three things you need to target in order to achieve the desired behaviour. So do we need to be more motivating? Do we need to get more top of mind so the trigger is more salient? Or do we need to be easier to choose or use? And marketing can be boiled down into those three things. And then we're all about deciding what is the susceptibility to change. How can we make people compare what they would have done with what we're offering them more favourably? Okay. And actually, most of our focus today is on people who are actively in market. We're not thinking so much about brand building or consumers. We're thinking about shoppers. We're thinking about buyers. And buyers, fundamentally, are driven by their means. The motivation's set. The trigger is going to be the thing that drives them into the market. But after they've been triggered, what means do they have at their disposal? What are they short of? And what do they have in abundant supply? And if you think in terms of these 6 metrics, money, effort, time, risk, individuality, and conscious thought, these are the resources we always have at our disposal to spend. And actually, they're the things we spend all the time. So they're the things we spend most habitually, most automatically. So we don't think about these measures. We spend them automatically, which makes them very susceptible to biases, to errors, to fallacies, but also very susceptible to influence. So from the point of view of what we talk to people about in comms, we're most likely to want to talk to them about one of these things: money, effort, time, risk, individuality, and conscious thought. And as we go through later on, we're going to show you some examples of how that works in practice for affecting people's decisions in the conversion journey. But fundamentally, these things, while seeming very different, are actually used quite interchangeably by people. So if we're short of time, we're happier spending money. If we don't want to take a risk, we'll follow what everybody else is doing, or we'll spend more time and effort thinking about what we want to do. And if we just don't want to think at all, we'll just follow the autopilot and do what we did last time, or do what everybody else is doing. So we spend these kinds of resources very interchangeably, actually, and in different circumstances, different contexts. What's most important, what we're most short of, makes the biggest difference. And as a result, these 6 categories: money, effort, time, risk, individuality, and conscious thought, actually provide us with the vast majority of the behavioural biases that we're all used to experiencing. Here's just a few examples, but fundamentally what this is great for is demonstrating that if you've got a marketing challenge, you've got a user journey challenge, chances are you can take 6 different approaches at least, just off the back of that metric model. So that's what we're going to show you later, is how these help you influence the journey with a very simple sort of toolkit. Okay. The final thing to point out is that fundamentally our brains work on friction and flow. So we work with cognitive ease and salience. The things that we find it very easy, our brains find it very easy to distinguish what's happening, what's changing, and what's staying the same. Staying the same, our brains don't reprocess it. We don't need to. We go mad if we try to process all the stimulus coming at us. So instead, what we do is we only process about 2 to 5% of what's coming at us, the things that are changing. The things that stay the same, we don't need to process. But also, if we're familiar with something, if we already know something, our brains just go back to that memory very, very quickly. So many people won't ever have seen this picture before. Some of you will have done. The picture on the right-hand side. For those that have, you can probably immediately see the cow. For others, it'll just look like blotches of black and white. But there's a cow's ear here, and a nose here, and eyes here and here. And once you've seen it, you don't forget that. Your brain's incredibly good at picking out those patterns again. Same reason why we can pick a face out of a crowd once we know that face and would never have registered with us before until we've met that person or know that face. Our brains are incredibly good at drawing the familiar out of the unknown and difference out of that sea of sameness. And that pattern of friction and flow is critical to how we make design work, how we make copy stand out, how we pull out the salient item that we most want to demonstrate, but also make use of the cognitive ease of just processing things we're already familiar with. That's really why brands work so effectively, because we're so familiar with what that red and white might mean. We know what that swoosh might mean, so we don't need to reprocess that again. We're only focused on the individual message that they want to get across at that point. Okay, over to you, Sarah. No, Laura, sorry.
I could change my name, that's fine. I love the cow. I think the cow is so good at illustrating that point. So conversion rate optimization. Yeah, so do you want to go to the next slide? Yeah. So basically, I'm going to call it CROW because conversion rate optimization is a bit of a mouthful. It's a combination of user experience, visual and behavioural design principles, research and analysis, and testing to improve the traffic that you've already got coming to your site. So in a nutshell, that will lower your acquisition cost because you're not trying to boost traffic, you're just making the best of what you've got. And we try and install a test tube approach to make sure that we can trial new innovations or just try, I don't know, changing something simple that we think is going to have a good effect so that we can make sure that you're not pushing code live that is going to impact your journey negatively. And the way that we would use behavioural science is that we consider every component as a potential selling point or a friction point. And eventually, I think we're seeing the web moving away from a kind of one-size-fits-all approach and towards a more personalised and tailored view. And we can use the data that we have coming into our websites to build audience personas and then show them relevant experiences that we know work best with those groups. So if you'd like to go to the next slide. Thank you. So I'm going to give you a kind of overview of a process that you could potentially use to get to a point where you can start applying those behavioural nudges. So firstly, hopefully you'd all have your analytics set up. So you've got Google Analytics or something similar to that. You have a look at that, you see who's doing what, where they're going on the site, what's happening on your critical paths, and then we can start looking at just the complete out-of-the-box segments, non-converting and converting customers, trying to pin together what each segment is doing, just so that we can start to understand where gaps might appear, because that will then give us an idea as to what we can do to change the journey for that particular group. So once you've got an idea of your performing and non-performing segments, I would sort of modeling. So Hotjar, I think you can do for free. You can watch what users are doing. You can actually segment your traffic from analytics and pull those segments into Hotjar and look at what those particular customers are doing across the journey. So you can get a full picture of, you know, what they're doing and then potentially why they're exhibiting those behaviours. On the next slide, I have just put together a very, very quick, I did this sort of half an hour dummy analysis so that I could kind of give you guys an example of what sort of things that we might be looking at. So I took a really simple example of desktop versus mobile, because it's quite easy to just apply those segments. And I used Google's merchandise store, which I'm sure you've all seen if you've got an analytics account, because that's what it likes to set you up with. Essentially, I went through and worked out that if you know, desktop traffic makes up the majority of the traffic, but mobile makes up 30%, how can the 89% of our conversions be happening on desktop? What's different about mobile? Well, no conversions were happening off the back of paid search for mobile. Mobile users were half as likely to return. Once they're gone, they're gone. The average session was too long for a mobile user. So that gives me an idea. We can try and cut out parts of the journey when we start to present that to mobile visitors. And you know, as I said earlier, you kind of want to get to that kind of one-to-one view, but you're not going to start with like Susan, age 49, loves cats. You're going to have to start with these kind of much broader segments of people so that you can then tailor them down. And as I say, then once I've got that view of the mobile traffic, kind of where I think that's going wrong, I'd then look at the session data to try and work out why these mobile customers are like throwing away their basket at the last minute. What can we then implement in that checkout process that will tip them over to buying? Cool. And it's not just about looking at the big gaps. We actually always want to look at similarities as well. So patterns that you can establish in your traffic. Do new visitors always follow the same patterns? Do they always visit the same pages? Do the same, if people are buying specific products, can you see in sessions that they're always looking at a specific part of the page? So you can start to use this data to understand what is happening. And that's kind of all Crow is understanding what's going on and then trying to make small changes to improve it. And it seems like really super complicated, but I think it is learnable. Anyone can learn it.
Oh, you're on mute, Steve.
Oh, what a classic.
It is a classic.
I'll say that again. So all that helps us optimize user journeys, but how? What's the process for that? Well, as I already referred to, the metric model, METRIC, helps us actually by giving us ideas as a start point for that. Maybe we could compare. Maybe the number we're putting in front of people, the money that we're putting in front of people, isn't framed correctly. Maybe we can find a better way to have them think of the number correctly. Maybe we just need to make it easier, take some steps out, as Laura mentioned. Chunk it more, break the journey down more. Maybe it's about seizing the opportunity of now and really giving some more urgency to the process. Perhaps it's about removing uncertainty from the journey. Quite often there's there's uncertainty as to what happens if you click. If you can remove that uncertainty, it's much more likely people are going to make that click. Or if you use the herd mentality, help people follow the crowd, show them that other people do this, show them that that other people are doing it right now, even more so. Or possibly just save brain power, make it feel automatic, take steps out of the journey of the brain as well. So what we're going to do is just show you a few examples of how that works in practice, and also the sort of data that underlies those processes so that you can drive it more effectively. So first off, money. Here's a good example with the data on it as well. If we can actually make lower the barriers for people so that it's an easier journey for people to take, that's obviously going to help. Laura, do you want to say something on this?
Yeah, so if you've got visitor statuses, in your analytics software, then you can pay that back in the experiences that you have on site. So for this one, as an example, we know that they're not signed in, but they're then given this discount.
Yes, that's excellent, because we know we can be very specific about who we're offering that kind of discount to. So we know that it's only in those circumstances where we specifically want to make that offer available, but we're driving that with the underlying data on it. Even more relevant, obviously, in saving money terms, anything that you can draw out that is actually something that comes as part of the package or is free or tempts people to go up through another barrier is a really good way of using free. The power free has an overriding effect on people's brains. As soon as you see something free, it's a natural draw. Same thing with new and now. Certain words are just extremely powerful in retail, as we all know, but there's a fundamental underlying behavioural science reason for that. And in this case, it's the anchoring of the brain on the idea of free. Things that you believe should have value and that you're getting for free override your consideration of other things that perhaps you might not. Okay. Then we've got the examples of saving effort. So one of the easiest ways to make things easier, break information down into chunks. Laura, do you want to say something on this?
Yeah, there's quite nice design features that you can use to try and make very complicated information more simple, and those are quite nice illustrations there, where you've got the Apple product on the left and you've got all the visuals, and then I don't even know what that is on the right, but it's just a horrible block of table text that you can't really understand and scan. And from my experience in user testing, we know that people aren't reading information really on the page. They are generally just scanning down, and that chunking effect helps them remember specific information about a product that will eventually help them to buy it.
Another example of saving effort, though, is just the simple idea of pre-populating. So if anything you can do that removes effort from the individual because you're in a position from a data point of view to help them out and give them a step ahead is obviously also going to be good.
Yeah, and if you have the Google autofill settings available to you, then use that, because that's just a one click that everyone can use to fill in forms.
Okay. Saving time. There's two real components to the idea of time. What our brains do is naturally bias to things that have either happened very recently or are about to happen. We don't think very well about things that happened a long time ago because our brains find them harder to get to. And we don't think very, very well about things that are a long distance in the future because they're hard to imagine. So actually things that are either very recent or very immediate have a real power in our minds.
Yeah, so the example we've put in there around the free shipping is the last thing you see before you check out. So that's more likely to stick in your mind, as Steve said. And you can understand where people are looking for that information by using heat maps in the session recording tools. That can be a good way to see where people are focusing on the page.
Yeah, and you can also give a real sense of urgency and immediacy to purchase decisions by showing people how recently, how much is going on recently around that product. And then there's immediacy. Actually, people are more and more, especially in this Amazon Prime era, addicted to getting things now, getting things in the very near future. So that has an enormous power to urge people to prioritize that saving of time over the saving of money.
I don't really have anything to add to that, except for I totally fall into that with Prime, that I will buy something more expensive because it's quicker to get here.
Yeah, I've got garden furniture, which we've already mentioned. I've got garden furniture sat in the garden that I ordered quickly and insisted on getting within the next few weeks, and then has just left to sit there in the packaging for that entire time over the winter. Never got around to doing it. So yeah, now is very powerful. And the example on the left is obviously eBay, where you can either buy it now or you can make an offer and wait uncertainly for days and days. And sometimes it's worth just doing that. Amazon are obviously stepping up things like same-day delivery, and others as well. It's a real sort of development this year of people who are really pushing into that space. But the classic Prime delivery of next day is still incredibly powerful, and has created that expectation across the market that people should be able to get something they didn't really need in the first place within 24 hours of when they ordered it.
And I actually think it makes it harder for people to move away from Amazon if they want to, because they know that they just want the thing now.
Yeah, why wait? I mean, what's the advantage to them of buying from another retailer that can't get it there in that timescale, even if they don't especially need it? It's a hard thing to resist. I think it's really noticeable in books, where obviously it all started, but still, after all these years, still book retailers, apart from Amazon, don't seem to be able to get the package to you within a few days, and it's sort of bizarre, really, that this model has existed for so long, and yet the rest are still behind. So saving risk is really important. Risk is a fundamentally very valuable thing to people. And if we're able to show that we're the less risky option, show that we're the one that removes uncertainty, we have a huge advantage over competitors. This is the one space actually in a way where brands really come into their own, because brands are the safe option. The well-known brand is an extremely powerful choice driver. And so retail brands that are well known and have there are good reasons to trust are incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and the reason we've included these examples is that it's not just about having good reviews on your site. Your site should be well designed and easy to use. That also improves the trust of your site. So, having kind of Comic Sans everywhere is probably not going to do wonders for your sort of trust effect. Whereas having kind of well-established hierarchy of content and good navigation, and everything is clear and easy and consistent to follow, is really just going to help make your brand look more trustworthy.
Yeah, and sort of not quite a counterexample of this is a brand like Ryanair, which at least historically used to consciously use a bit closer to the left-hand side to demonstrate its value over its trustworthiness. So it was absolutely about showing that they weren't wasting money on nice-looking stuff and pretty brands. It was all about, no, everything is about stripping down the price to the minimum. They've moved away from it a bit now, but as a way of signalling that money was the priority, it was incredibly powerful.
That's a good point, actually, because web brutalism is becoming a bit of a thing, where people are just having a white page with text on.
Yeah, and in a way, Google Ads do that. It's almost like the simplicity of display ads that are nothing but font. Is absolutely signaling that people aren't wasting money on stuff. I assure you, it's not wasted. I'll make a business out of it, so I'd really rather people didn't do that. But actually, well-designed stuff does send out quite a lot more signals, so it's well worth thinking about. The other aspect of risk is the risk of missing out. The fear of missing out is very powerful. And it's an extremely powerful way of driving sales, which again, I'm sure anybody in retail is used to using, whether consciously deciding to do so for a behavioural science reason or not. Scarcity and the sense of scarcity and urgency that comes with it are really powerful. And again, that's something that you can fill with either accurate data, or quite a lot of these kind of 3 people watching the page stuff might not be particularly truthful. And we'll come on to whether or not dark methods are appropriate or not. But yeah, fundamentally, like this hint of other people being about to snaffle this thing before you do, or just a little bit of social proof that other people are like you, interested in this thing, are very powerful ways of sort of building the sense that actually this is something that I should get, and I should get now. Then this herd principle, this idea that actually individuality is something that is a cost to you. It's that diversion from the herd that is actually a cognitive load for people. The idea of going out on your own is risky. And so actually being reassured by what other people do, or what authority figures tell you, or what influencers tell you, is a powerful way to draw people back to the sense that it's okay, everyone's coming with you, you're safe, you're with the herd. And that powerful principle has been played out a lot over many years, but there is a really sound fundamental behavioural principle underneath it.
And yeah, and if you are interested in working out if that's going to be appropriate for you, then you can have a look at the traffic and see if people are constantly navigating to things like your FAQs, reviews, and about us pages. That's kind of a good signal that people are looking to have a bit more of a feeling of trust in your authority.
The other aspect of which is actually using the social proof of what other people are doing more directly. So there's the kind of nudgify stuff of other people like you, and playing that story through to people, as well as reviews and Trustpilot ratings and endorsements from brands, all of which kind of build this picture of you're not on your own, everybody else is doing this too. It's a safe choice, and that's a really powerful way to bring people with you on the journey.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve.
If
your review is too perfect, people
Sorry,
if
Laura,
your reviews are too perfect, that they're not. Sorry,
yes, absolutely.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Well, I mean, actually,
Okay,
fundamentally, people connect with. People want to know the risk, and they need to know that there is something in there. They need to know there's an imperfection in the thing, because absolutely, otherwise they're not trustworthy. It's actually true of. True of the way that we meet people as well. Actually, people connect with the flaws or the vulnerabilities of the fact we have things in common, and they need to see a little imperfection. Otherwise, they don't trust you. It's all too perfect. Fundamentally, trust is built on that sort of shared common grounds of experience. So, a little bit of colour is necessary in that picture. Then finally, conscious thought, which is ultimately the most powerful one, because conscious thought is, if we can save people conscious thought, is because they're switching into autopilot mode. And autopilot is what drives almost all behaviour. 90% of behaviour is habitual, 45% of what we do every day, and this is before lockdown, 45% of what we do every day is the same as what we did yesterday. We brush our teeth at the same time, we eat the same breakfast and lunch, we do all the same sorts of stuff every day. So if we can get into the autopilot for people, we're in an absolutely great space. We've already referred obviously to Amazon as a brand that really has been able to capture that autopilot, first place to turn kind of mentality. And the way to do that is to play to cognitive ease. It's to be able to be easier for people to process, easier for people to just move through smoothly without even having to engage thought, having to actively process. And that's one of the things that brands like Amazon have been particularly good at doing. Making people feel at ease and already familiar with what they're looking at, and flowing through consistently from one thing to another, so that it feels like a very natural thing to do whatever the next thing they need to do is.
Yeah, so if you have information based on people's browsing history, seeing what products they've already viewed, if you resurface those products to them, then they're more likely to click through because they're in the market for those potentially. And then that checklist there is some things that you can do to make people feel like these things apply to them. So you've got the analytics data, the demographic data to look at imagery, so you can see who's doing what, and then can we surface some imagery that fits that demographic. The website being free of clutter we've spoken about, I think, in the kind of trustworthy section, and then the easy to read copy. There's plenty of tools online that you can use to run your web copy through to check how readable it is, and if possible you want to make it as easy to read as possible. So there's a scale called the Flesch-Kincaid readability scale. You want to have your copy hitting at least 70 plus on that scale, because it's just so much easier to interpret. And then things like if you've got somebody logged in and you can play their name back to them, that's a really simple thing that you can do to make people feel that they belong there, and it's that they're back to where they need to be.
Yeah, and fundamentally everything that you add into a page that doesn't need to be there, whether that's lengthy words or long sentences or clutter visually, it's all cognitive load. So everything that's there that gets in the way of the thing that you actually want people to do has to have a really good purpose to be there, or else, why is it there? It's just getting in the way. It's not necessarily getting directly in the way, but it's drawing the eye and drawing the mind away from what matters on that page. So we have to make sure that there's a good reason why we've got things on the page, including the things that we're talking about here, like even the names and stuff. One of the great things that Amazon do on that top bar, that main Meet the Echo family, they've got a strict rule that says no calls to action. Everything's clicked. That whole thing is clickable, so everybody knows, has already been trained what to do, and if they're interested in something there, and no more than one proposition there as well. So that sentence is as simple as it can be. It's as obvious as it can be, and it's just telling what the brand that needs to be engaged with is. Keeps it so simple, but actually so effective. And finally, for our examples, the other part of saving conscious thought, again, we've already talked about the idea of cognitive ease. The other half of that picture, the other yin to that yang, is salience. What needs to stand out? What is the thing that needs to punch forward at that particular moment? What has that real grasp in that particular moment?
Yeah, so again, we've got some information about the customer which is being recorded in an analytics that we can look at and hook onto to then serve back those offers. Example of salience, I just want to illustrate is served back and how it connects to analytics there.
Sorry, Laura,
just gone off.
Yeah, you just rolled a bit there.
Yeah. Yeah, just saying that this isn't like the greatest example ever of the salience principle, but essentially it does show you how the information that you've got with analytics, you can hook onto that and then serve up that relevant content. So this is an offer that's just before checkout, and it just triggers that thought in your mind like, oh, this subscription's expired, I must need to do that now. And it's highlighted in that kind of orange color, and the little eye icon just to remind you that it's there.
So I think it's another really good example of how there's data underpinning and driving which of these metric model items we might want to use, why that opportunity should present itself now, how we can make use of the principles, but underpin it with data that's analyzable and reusable, and how we can take the signals that the user's giving off, the things that we can detect about them and about where they're up to in the journey, to play back a story that makes it smoother and easier to move through the journey in the direction we want. That's really what this whole principle is about, that we have. But if we want people to convert, if we want people to move forward in the user journey, we have to remove the barriers and make it as smooth and easy to do so as possible. And that's really what this whole metric model is about and what CRO is about. So hopefully you found that interesting. That is pretty much the end of where we want to talk about. Obviously, as we said, loads more for us to talk about if people are interested, but that's a sort of brief introduction to the ways that we've been thinking about behavioural science in the user journey and in CRO and vice versa. One last thing, Laura.
As Steve alluded to earlier, you can put information on your site that isn't necessarily true to try and nudge people into doing things and influence behaviours, but that there's a bit of a grey area as to whether or not that is the right thing to do. There's a website called Dark Patterns. I think it's .org, but I might be wrong. And you may get called out for that. So just watch out if you're going to put information that isn't necessarily true on your website to do that. And also just, it's good to be good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's another principle. Much more likely to get customers that come back if you actually treat them well.
Exactly.
Right, David, I think we didn't do too badly there. I think we weren't far off on our target of being about 15 minutes each.
Yeah, you did a fantastic job, guys. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. And now we've just got time for a couple of questions before we sign off and give everyone back some time. So the first question we have, Laura, I think this is more directed to you. Does your CRO approach differ drastically on mobile compared to desktop? I believe you touched a little bit on this earlier on. So could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, the approach doesn't really differ, but what you might end up doing may differ. So I think I touched upon earlier that we shouldn't consider the web or the experience of a web as one size fits all. And that's because how you browse on your mobile and how you browse on your desktop are two different things. You'll have different mindsets. You'll probably be in a different location using your phone. So it's just about how you make that journey easier for somebody to get through on a mobile, for example. You may have a bit of extra time on desktop for extra shopping around because you're sat down, you're concentrating, you're probably focusing on the job a little bit more. So yeah, the approach of actually trying to assess whether there's a difference and what we might do is the same, but the outcome is probably different.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that there's just fundamentally, there are still quite different behaviours taking place in terms of things like readiness to buy as well. So, but also the barriers. Mobile is usually a little easier to buy because a lot of us have credit cards already set up associated with it that mean that we can just hold down the button and it's done. Which you still often have to fill in a load of details to buy something on desktop, which is just introducing barriers. So there are some fundamental differences in terms of how quickly we can move people through the journey mobile-wise, and how little we can rely on them reading anything or engaging with long copy. So I think there's some really sort of sound principles to separating the two things out. But fundamentally, most people's phones are bordering on tablets these days anyway, so the boundaries are always coming down a little.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you both. And another question. It's a bit of a broader one, so get your thinking caps on both. How have behaviours changed because of the pandemic, or has the pandemic just sped up an existing behaviour change? So, i.e., will these same behaviours exist post-pandemic?
Yeah, it's a big question. There are a lot of behaviours that were fundamentally only changed because of the pandemic. So a good example is in grocery, where you saw a real shift, especially in the first lockdown, where people were actually fearful, worried about supplies of food, and actually worried about leaving the house. And as a result of which, what had been a very, very long-standing trend towards the discounters, people's priority around money shifted to priorities around minimising risk. And so they moved from the Aldi shop to the Tesco big shop, moved back towards a big shop model because you knew you wanted to just get it all done in one place and be sure that the range and the supply was going to be there. That was a very lockdown-driven need that hasn't been sustained. So you can reasonably say that was driven by pandemic. Something more like this kind of overall online shift. There obviously was a pandemic driver for it. There was a reason why people shifted towards buying things online because the shops were shut. But I don't know about you, the number of vans coming down my street didn't slow down that much in the months when the shops were open again. People have shifted and found it a convenient pattern. And there's a lot of people who sort of broke their cherry on doing the online shopping and have now adopted it as a habit because actually it fundamentally has some serious advantages for them. So it's unlikely that a lot of that will slip back in the same sort of way. There's plenty of advantages that people have discovered, and a new behaviour that makes it hard to go back to the other one, even if the shops do open again. I think John Lewis announced yesterday when they were closing their stores that they expect something like 70 or 80% of their trade to be online from now on. So they're really sort of fundamentally seeing a shift in what people do and how.
Yeah, I think it's the same, just to echo that, but there's definitely been an increase in kind of the older or maybe slightly technically less literate people who have had to, out of necessity, start using online shopping as an alternative, and then have actually grown in confidence over the lockdown period because they've just had to do it. And I don't think that will slow down either after we come out eventually.
Just one sort of slight counterpoint to it is obviously that there's also a growth in local. There's also a shift towards an appreciation of what's immediately around you and the benefits of having a local store of any kind. Lots of different aspects to that, but the shift towards local, choosing to shop locally for sort of ethical reasons, but also actually just driven by appreciation that those stores are available to you, and that actually it's a good way to spend your lunchtime now you're living at home and working at home. That kind of stuff is also hopefully going to be able to persist because it's a huge boost to people's sense of community and hugely powerful for what the high street represents and the future of the high street. So being able to build up that sense of the local community as the local stores as a pooled resource for communities is hopefully going to be a trend that carries on.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think like probably going forward, hopefully maybe because those sort of more experiential things have been in decline over lockdown, those are the things that retailers take forward onto the high street rather than just, you know, selling commodities as usual. And we might get a bit of a different high street out of the end of this, but we'll see, I guess.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, both. That's all we have time for. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to both of our speakers and, of course, the audience. I hope everyone took away something valuable in both actions or insights. If you are interested in finding out more about how this approach to marketing can help you thrive as an individual in 2021, please do get in contact with Laura and Steve. They are offering 15-20-minute consultation calls to answer any specific questions you may have. You can reach them on LinkedIn, or you can reach Laura North for conversion rate optimization on laura.north@fountainpartnership.co.uk. And you can reach Steve Brunt for behavioural science on steve@thebehaviorsagency.com. They've just got some fantastic reading for you to do outside of this as well.
I just realised, David, it probably would have been cognitively easier for people to actually see those email addresses on screen. So that's a note for us next time, isn't it?
Well, we are sending an email out afterwards, which will have all of this in it. So don't feel like you're missing out on anything. You will get that email, and that will be written down for you. Thank you very much again. Stay safe, all the best, and goodbye.
Bye.